And welcome to this edition of Dr. Carole's Couch. I'm your psychiatrist host, Dr. Carole Lieberman. Well, today's show is coming straight from Israel, live from Israel. At least one of us is live from Israel. I was live from Israel a little while ago, but not today, not during the show, although my heart is still there. Today's show is called What's a Somaliland and How Will It Bring Peace to the Middle East? My guest is Rabbi Pesach Wolicki. He is going to be answering these questions. He's an expert on Israel and the Middle East and the theological and ideological drivers behind Western and Islamist policies towards Israel. And he's going to be explaining, I'll bet you, for people who are watching this or listening to this in America, I will bet you that you have not heard about this yet, because this is the kind of thing that American media doesn't really, it's not their strong suit, shall I say, reporting good things about Israel. Um, so the question there's lots of talk when you hear about Somalis. You probably thought I was going to be talking about Minnesota and all the destruction of Minnesota, the destruction of America, basically, that is happening in Minnesota and many other places around America. But in Minnesota in particular, Somalis were moved there and years ago, and they are destroying Minnesota. They've also been mooching mooching money, taking money illegally by creating various fake businesses like a learning center where they spelt learning wrong. I mean, all kinds of scams, really, to take our taxpayer money. So, what's a Somaliland? My guest expert is going to be answering that. One question is, how is it different from Somalia, you're probably thinking? And why is Israel sending shockwaves through the world by being the first country to recognize Somaliland? Um, Now, and then also we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, whose idea this was, presumably. And the question is, does he have an ace up his sleeve, or is he making a big mistake? And I will bet on the former, because he, just like Trump, they really know what it's no wonder that they work so well together, because both of them are so strategic, so smart. Trump with his art of the deal, and Netanyahu with just, his fierce protection of Israel. So, but what does that have to do with Somaliland? Well, today, Rabbi Pesach Wolicki is going to tell us. Welcome to the show, Rabbi.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be with you and with your audience. And yeah, there's a lot to explain here about Somaliland.
Yes, I
It's
never
very
even
important, though.
okay, I never even heard of Somaliland. Um, I mean, I guess well, why don't we start with that? I mean, I've been looking it up and reading about it. But why? I would like to start with why, because I was looking at maps, and that's not my strong suit in terms of figuring things out map wise. But why? I mean, I know it's on the Cape Horn of Africa, and presumably that is important for a trade route. But could you explain why Israel cares about Somaliland?
Sure. This is actually a very important geopolitical move that Israel did by recognizing Somaliland. So let's start with a little bit of historical background. The there was a Somali civil war that went on in the 1980s, and it ended just at the beginning of the 90s. And the northern part of what was Somalia split off and became independent and called itself Somaliland. Okay. Now, Somaliland since 1991 has declared itself independent. They've had self-rule. They are democratic. They are pro-Western. They've had multiple peaceful transfers of power, and they are not recognized. Oh, well, they weren't recognized until Israel recognized them by any country in the world. Their independence was simply not recognized by anyone. And Somalia, which is the southern part, and the shape of Somalia and Somaliland is very strange. It almost looks like a boomerang. It's almost like this strange or like one of those right angles you took out of your pencil case when you went to school. Some piece of it's a very strangely shaped country, but the northern part of it sits right across the Gulf of the Red Sea from Yemen, from the area that the Houthis are in Yemen. And we all, if we've been following the news at all from the Middle East for the last couple of years, the Houthis, backed by the Iranians, who rule most of northern Yemen, had been shelling international shipping vessels at the mouth of the Red Sea. So
Yeah.
Somaliland sits right across. It sits right across from Yemen, right across on the Gulf there. Now this country, well, we could call it a country now. They've declared their independence. It's very similar to the Taiwan situation, where you have a nation that Taiwanese people are ethnically Chinese, and they were at some point part of China, but they refused to submit to the Chinese Communist Party, and they have their own kind of democratic republic that virtually no one in the world recognizes.
Mm.
It's a very, very similar situation. So Somaliland. So that's Somaliland. So Somaliland and Somalia are very, very different. When you're talking about the corrupt Somalis in Minnesota and Ilhan Omar's family, those are the radical jihadist Somalis who live in Somalia. So Somalia is not only not democratic and not pro-Western like Somaliland, but Somalia is basically a hotbed of al-Shabaab, kind of ISIS-aligned terrorism, lots of corruption. It's really a terrible place, especially a terrible place for Christians who get severely persecuted there. And Somalia and the rest of the Muslim world is very adamant about pushing the whole world not to recognize the Republic of Somaliland, which is why President Trump, even though Prime Minister Netanyahu recognized Somaliland, and there is a caucus in the Congress led by a number of very nationalistic Republicans who lead this caucus to recognize Somaliland, but it's never really gotten a lot of traction because the Muslim states like Qatar and Saudi Arabia and Turkey, these Muslim states that are still aligned with the Islamic ideology, even in some moderate way. So it's not just the extremists, but even countries like Egypt and Jordan, they are opposed to anyone recognizing the independence of Somaliland. That said, the truly moderate Muslim states like the United Arab Emirates, Morocco, the ones who are part of the Abraham Accords, they don't officially recognize Somaliland, but they kind of tacitly do and help them. The Emiratis do a lot of investment in Somaliland. But the reason that Prime Minister Netanyahu recognized Somaliland the other day was in order to, first of all, he is trying to build this anti-Islamist bloc that is aligned with Israel and the Abraham Accords and expand that to Somaliland. He also wants to expand. The Israelis are going to be very involved in the security infrastructure in Somaliland. Now that they've recognized Somaliland, the Israelis are going to be operating there. So this is all causing the Islamists in the region to freak out. I'm going to pause there and let you ask some questions because there's so much to talk about. There's a lot more to it even than what I've said, but I hope I've started the explanation.
Yes, yes. Well, and also I would imagine because they would like a country across from Yemen so that their ships, that if the Houthis start firing on the ships, they can at least, if they go closer to Somaliland, then they would be safer.
Well, for sure, look, a third of all global shipping passes through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. That's the narrow opening of the Red Sea there at the Red Sea Gulf. And then the shipping, so all the shipping, the way goods get from the Far East and India to Europe is not across the Pacific through the United States and across the Atlantic. The way it gets from the Far East to Europe is it comes down around the Horn of Africa and up, and then up through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, up through the Suez Canal, through the Red Sea, through the Suez Canal, into the Mediterranean, and up through Turkey or Greece or Italy into Europe. That's the way goods, a third of all global shipping, passes through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. And that's why the Houthis establishing this terrorist army right on Yemen there as part of their protest of Israel's actions in Gaza, they decided to disrupt global shipping. And that's why the United States was bombing Yemen last year. That's why they were bombing the Houthis last year, is to get them to stop disrupting global shipping. So
Mm.
Somaliland is located in a very strategic location, but there's also a larger long-term strategic issue, which is that because as I mentioned, Somaliland is aligned with the United Arab Emirates, who are heavily invested there, and the Emirates recently renovated the main port of Somaliland to make it a deep water port that will be able to be used as a hub for global shipping and for military naval operations. This could become a Western foothold. Now,
Mm.
why this also comes at a time that across the Middle East, a lot has changed in the last 2 years. And besides Israel fighting a war of survival, there's also been a reshaping of the power structure of the Middle East. So the Iranians, who were really, one of the, kind of regional superpowers, who had their proxies in Yemen and Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hezbollah Iraq, and they kind of controlled much of Syria, and they were, of course, greatly weakened by the Israelis throughout this war. Hamas, Hezbollah, the various proxies, the Assad regime that was a proxy of Iran, were all decimated by Israel. But what has happened is that the Turks, Erdogan's Turkey, which is very radicalized, he speaks openly about marching on Jerusalem and destroying the state of Israel. He has been trying to replace the Iranians as the main Islamist superpower in the region. So I know we're coming up on a break in a minute, but
Yeah, I
what
was
we
just
need to
going to
get in,
say.
what we need to really get into to further understand the importance of this move is what are the power dynamics developing in the Middle East right now? What are between the various blocks of Muslim nations? For most Americans, you kind of think of all these Arab nations all as kind of one thing. Oh, there's Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Emirates and
Right.
Jordan, and but there's actually some very distinct factions that people have to understand, and it also helps shed light on where U.S. foreign policy is going and where it might be making some critical mistakes.
Yes, and you're right that we have a break coming up. I just want to say something about Turkey. You know, um, in my work as the terrorist therapist, I don't know if you are aware of that, but since 9/11, I've been working as the terror working, devoting my time for free primarily, um, to help people cope with terrorism and to warn people about, about terrorism, about terrorists wanting to come into, well, they are in the United States, but wanting to take over the United States. So, early on, I have been aware of Turkey, that how people kind of think Turkey is just this nice country where you go for plastic surgery, where it's
Well,
cheaper
people
to
think of
get.
it as pro-Western because they're part of NATO.
Uh-huh. And really all along it's not, it's very radical Islam, and it is very, much intent upon destroying Israel and anti-Semitic and everything else. It's just, somehow it's managed to stay under the radar a bit. But it really, we need to be very concerned about it. And it's interesting because Netanyahu recently said something where he was not gonna, I forgot what, I remember, not allowing Turkey to be on the group that was going to determine what was going on in Gaza. And some people were like, oh, he's not gonna, that's not right. He's trying to stop the peace plan. That
Oh,
wasn't
we got to
it at
talk about
all.
that. We have to
That
talk about
wasn't
that.
it. That wasn't it at all. He was just trying, he knows what he's talking about. See, that's part of
Absolutely.
that's the problem, that a lot of people have not been studying this for years and they don't really know what's going on, but they have their own opinions. All right. We need to take a break, and we will be right back. And welcome back to Dr. Carol's Couch. I'm your psychiatrist host, Dr. Carole Lieberman, talking with you today about live from Israel, coming to you live from Israel, with an expert on the Middle East and on Israel and on what is going on now with Somaliland. It kind of, I always, I think of Candyland when I say Somaliland, but it's not quite that. We're talking about what's a Somaliland and how will it bring peace to the Middle East. And before the break, we were talking about Turkey and how it's not really this innocent little benevolent country. It really has been hiding in plain sight, but hiding, pretending to be sort of neutral, and really of big danger to Israel and to to America for that matter. So welcome back, and Rabbi, why don't you continue with where you were?
Oh, absolutely. So I'm going to pull back from talking specifically about Somaliland for a second and talk about the Turks and the Middle East, and then come back to Somaliland, and we'll understand why it's so important to understand why the Somaliland issue really relates to the entire geostrategy of the region in terms of how it's shaping up. So Erdogan, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who is the president, the dictator of Turkey, even though Turkey is a member of NATO and ostensibly is a democracy, ever since Erdogan took over, he is an Islamist, and he is of the same ideology as the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood, if you're not familiar with that, with who that is, and you might have heard of them, they were in the news recently, because the Trump administration is looking into designating certain branches of the Muslim Brotherhood as terrorist organizations. The Muslim Brotherhood was founded after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, way back about 100 years ago, with the express purpose of promoting an Islamist ideology all over the world, with the express goal of recreating the caliphate, first of all, to regain all the lands that were part of the Islamic caliphate before the fall of the Ottoman Empire, but ultimately to rule the world. So the ideology that you hear about all the time now about these Muslims, and you see these viral videos going around of Muslims and various, in mosques in the Western world talking about Islam taking over the West. This is the Muslim Brotherhood ideology that has spread all over the world. And Hamas is a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. ISIS is a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. Al Qaeda is a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. Those are the more violent branches. But also in America, CARE and the Holy Land Foundation, and there's all these organizations operating in America, and many, many mosques operating in America who are affiliated in some way with the Muslim Brotherhood. This is a very dangerous organization. It's the major threat to the West coming out of the Muslim world. Now, Erdogan is of that ideology. He's a Muslim Brotherhood guy. Okay. And he speaks openly about ultimately reconquering Jerusalem and of recreating the Ottoman Caliphate. But Turkey's not that powerful a country, and he's never really been able to do it. But he was funding the terrorist groups that eventually brought down the Assad regime in Syria once Israel weakened Iran. About a year ago, the Assad regime fell. And we have this new guy, al-Julani or Ashara. You might have seen this guy, this former terrorist with a black beard who visited the White House recently. He's an alumnus of ISIS and Al Qaeda. He was funded by the Turks. So the Turks have been moving in ever since Israel started decimating the Iranian proxies. This is what I was talking about before the break. The Turks have seen this as an opportunity to move in and bring their brand of Islamism through their political power and their money and their weapons. So they've been funding terrorist groups all over the region. They've cut off all their relations with Israel. They don't even allow Israeli vessels to use their ports anymore. They've become a very hostile nation, despite the fact that the United States still considers them an ally because they're still part of NATO. So people think of them as moderate. And this is the big mistake. If there's anything that your audience learns from me today, I want it to be this. When you think about the Muslim countries, the way most Westerners, even those who pay some attention to the Middle East, think about them is they go, okay, there's the radical ones like Iran who fund terrorism, and like the way Syria was before Assad fell, like the really, really bad guys, the Taliban, ISIS, those are the bad guys. And then you have the moderate Arab states who we can do business with. And people think of the Gulf states, these more moderate sort of Western, they see Formula One races going on out in the Gulf and fashion shows, and they go, okay, those are the more Western, Muslim countries. And in that bucket of more Western Muslim countries, People think of the Emirates, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, but they also include in that, the way Westerners think, Qatar and Turkey. People think of Qatar and Turkey as more pro-Western and more moderate. And this is a major, major mistake. What they don't realize is that internally in the Middle East, no one sees it that way. Let me explain. The Muslim Brotherhood that I just described to you, its leadership is currently based in Turkey. And the Turks are the mothership of the Muslim Brotherhood in terms of the people and the muscle. But the financial backing of the Muslim Brotherhood and the ideological leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood, the theologians of the Muslim Brotherhood, are all based in Qatar. The Qataris and the Turks are the main leadership partners and funders and enablers of the Muslim Brotherhood worldwide. And here's the key. Back in 2017, there was almost an actual war, a shooting war in the Middle East between, on the one hand, the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the other legitimately moderate Arab states who almost went to war with Qatar over their support of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood, which is backed by and housed by the Turks and the Qataris, is designated a terrorist organization by the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Emiratis, the Saudis, and more. So we understand these are actually two very different camps in the Middle East. One detail out of the meeting with President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu from yesterday that I'm sure did not make it to Western media, it was reported here in Israel, is that in advance of this meeting, the Saudis and Emiratis let President Trump know that they want no part in, they won't give a dime to the reconstruction efforts in Gaza if the Qataris and the Turks are involved. You understand? These are different camps. They want nothing to do with each other. And what's happened in the Middle East, now I'm gonna come back to Somaliland in a second. So you have the Turks who their proxy terrorist is now the head of Syria. And he's persecuting the minorities there, the Christians, the Druze, the Alawites, and the Kurds. They're all being persecuted now, and by this Turkish-backed Islamist leader Ashara, who President Trump is treating like a good guy. So the Turks are now getting more entrenched in Syria. The reason the Turks want to be part of the Gaza thing, the reason they want to send troops, there's no country that wants to send troops there except the Turks. The Turks want to send troops there not to destroy Hamas or disarm them. They want to send troops there because they want to have a presence on the ground, because they're trying to consolidate their power and put their personnel into more places. Well, the Turks are also heavily invested in Somalia. The Turks train the Somalian army. They arm the Somalians. They have a military presence there. And guess who was the first nation, the first government to condemn Israel for recognizing Somaliland? Turkey. The Turks, because this recognition of Somaliland by Israel and this pledge to work with Somaliland on security cooperation and commerce and energy and maritime security there is a direct poke in the eye. It's a direct challenge to the Turks, who are trying to solidify their power across the Middle East. So the Israelis are facing off against the Turks. I'll give you another interesting data point in this. After the Assad regime fell, the Israeli army went in quickly and destroyed all the equipment of the Syrian army while the chaos was still going on. They weren't killing people, but they took out the whole air force. They took out all the air defenses, and taking out all of the Syrian air defenses created an air corridor that allowed Israel to carry out all of the air raids in the 12-day war against Iran, because that's the route that the planes take from Israel. They go up through Syria and through Iraq across to Iran. So that air corridor was, in order to create that air corridor that allowed the strikes on Iran to happen, they had to take out the Syrian surface-to-air missiles, the Syrian air defenses. So they took all of that out. In recent months, the Turks have been in Syria trying to rebuild the air defenses so that Israel doesn't have freedom of operation in the skies above the Middle East. And the Israelis, this is back in early September, there were Turkish air defense installations being installed by the Turks in Syria, and Israel went in and took them out. So you see here that it's not just about, Turkish troops in Gaza or not. That's only one piece of a larger Middle Eastern puzzle where the Turks are trying to assert themselves and become the main Islamist threat to Israel. And the Israelis are being adamant that now that we've taken out the Iranian Islamist superpower, the last thing we want is a Sunni Turkish superpower being built in its place. So Israel is not allowing Turkey to get these strategic footholds and is making moves to prevent it. So Israel is backing the minorities, the Kurds, the Druze, the Alawites, the Christians in Syria. And Prime Minister Netanyahu mentioned them in his press conference with President Trump, that the Israelis are protecting the minorities. Israel recognizes Somaliland, which is a direct affront to the Islamist axis down there around the Horn of Africa, where it meets the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula, where Yemen is. Israel, that very important maritime choke point. Israel recognizes Somaliland, but Israel also, over the last couple of weeks, another news story that I'm sure your listeners didn't see, because Americans tend not to really follow world politics that much. But a major news story that happened about a week and a half ago is that Israel had a summit meeting, the 10th summit meeting of the Prime Minister of Israel, the Prime Minister of Greece, and the President of Cyprus, who had their 10th summit meeting where they ratified a comprehensive alliance that includes defense, energy, trade, and it's the Eastern Mediterranean alliance of these three countries. And they were very open about the fact that for all of them, the adversary is a rising Turkey. Turkey illegally occupies 37% of the island of Cyprus, and the Greeks just bought $4 billion in air defenses from Israel, stating explicitly that this is to counter the rising threat of Turkey. So Israel is really positioned as a kind of regional superpower right now that is holding back the attempts of Turkey to become a regional Islamist superpower. And that's why Somaliland is such a critical piece of the puzzle.
Wow.
Hope that made sense.
Yes. It's it's really complicated, but
I
I'm
hope it made
glad.
sense.
I'm
I mean, if you
glad.
think
No,
about it, there's a
well, no,
logic to it.
yes, no, but I'm glad to hear that all this is going on. I'm glad to hear that people are recognizing Turkey as being the danger that it is.
I hope so.
So,
I hope the Trump administration wakes up
well,
because
yeah. I was just
this.
going to say, so at the meeting that Netanyahu had with Trump, let's see, it was Monday. It was yesterday, right? Or
It was
today?
Tuesday. Yeah, it was on Tuesday.
Today is Tuesday here in
No,
America.
no, it was Monday. Sorry, it was Monday. You're right. It
Okay.
was Monday. It was
Okay.
Monday.
Um,
Yeah, I'm losing
so
track of the days of the week.
So, of course, I think most people thought that it had to do with um, Gaza, and
I'm sure it did. That was
well,
one of the topics they discussed. Yes.
but I mean, I don't, I didn't hear anything about that they were any of this, that this was going to be part of it.
Well, they certainly discussed this. I mean, President Trump, after Israel recognized Somaliland, President Trump said that the United States is not prepared to do that because they don't want to have that confrontation with the Qataris and the Turks. I think that is a strategic mistake. I think that they should recognize Somaliland because that would put them in line with the more moderate Arab states. As I said, the Muslim states, 21 Muslim states, issued a statement condemning Israel's recognition of Somaliland, and they put a lot of pressure on Morocco and the Emirates and Bahrain to join them, and they refused. They did not join the condemnation. But President Trump was kind of hedging on that. They didn't discuss it in the press conference yesterday, but I want to make it very clear, and this people have to understand this. When you hear in the media about Israel refusing to allow Turkish troops into Gaza, and the United States saying that they want the Turks to be involved, whether or not the Turks get troops into Gaza is not just about Gaza. It's about the entire shaping of the geostrategic situation in the Middle East. If the Turks get a foothold on the southern border of Israel, that will be a long-term problem. Once the personnel
Yeah.
gets in, it's very hard to get them out. And
Yes.
Israel is under no circumstances going to allow a hostile power to be part of the security architecture on its southern border in
Yeah.
Gaza, especially because the idea that I'm sure the Turks are telling President Trump, don't worry, we'll disarm Hamas, which is ridiculous because Turkey supports Hamas. I mean, Erdogan praises Hamas as freedom fighters. He houses their leadership, he harbors them. There's no way he's going to disarm them because Hamas is refusing to disarm. They might go through some dog and pony show where they prepare to where they pretend to disarm and they just, give their weapons from one Islamist to another and they say this guy isn't Hamas and this guy is. They could play a game like that, but Israel's not going to fall for it. So I'm sure that the larger geostrategic map was part of the conversations. And let me also add, this summit meeting between Greece, Cyprus, and Israel, which was very transparently a pushback against rising Turkish power and was really an Eastern Mediterranean treaty alliance that has now been put together. And remember, Israel's also becoming an energy superpower in the region. They just signed a $36 billion natural gas supply deal with the Egyptians. So Israel's in a very powerful position. But the fact that they had this summit meeting and this announcement of this alliance right before Netanyahu went to visit President Trump is also a signal because this alliance between Greece, Cyprus, and Israel is also it also is part of a larger American plan. The Chinese Communist Party is trying to build this Belt and Road, this supply chain that's going to run from China all the way to Europe. And President Trump is trying to build with the Indians an alternative to it called the India, Middle East, Europe corridor, and that is a supply line that is being built to have Israel, the Israeli ports and the Israeli pass through, to be a critical piece of it, where the supply chains coming from the Far East would go from India, it would go through to Israel, and then across to Cyprus, Greece, and up into Europe, bypassing Turkey. So a lot of the moves Israel's making have everything to do with not allowing Turkey to become a regional superpower. In the shaping of the Middle East. It's about much, much more than the particular issue of the troops in Gaza. That's really just one very small piece of a much larger puzzle.
It's exhausting.
I hope it's making
I
sense. That's
mean,
my only.
no, yeah.
Please ask questions if there's something you want
The thing
clarified.
is, I do a podcast called The Terrorist Therapist Show. So I talk about these kinds of things, although I haven't talked about what you were just talking about in like that kind of detail. I just talk about Turkey bad. You know, Turkey, radical Islam, no, good. I go a little further than that, but not, but but the thing that concerns me is that I love President Trump. I totally, totally support him. I have since the beginning.
Oh, and as an Israeli, we're extremely grateful to him.
Yes,
Even with my criticisms, please understand, he is the greatest, most pro-Israel president.
yes.
For as a Jew in Israel, as a with my children fighting in Gaza. Trust
Well,
me, we are grateful that President Trump is the president, but that's not going to change the fact that when I have criticisms for the direction he's taking in certain
sure.
aspects of his foreign policy, I'm going to voice them.
Well, sure, sure. But here's the thing, like I have been concerned for a number of different reasons along the way, that I don't know that he has anybody who is really an expert like you or like Robert Spencer or some other real when 9/11 happened, I had this sense that terrorism was going to be the biggest threat to us in our lives. And so that's when I decided to become the terrorist therapist to help people cope with terrorism and to warn people about what was going on with terrorism, like, that they want to take us over and put us under Sharia law or kill us. Um, and so, but I didn't really know anything about terrorism when 9/11 happened. So I quickly did research and went to all these conferences and met, leaders in the field and so on. And and they would talk about how terrorists are going to be trying to take America over, but not just by 9/11 attacks, mainly by gradually climbing up in media and in politics and in education. Now
We're
they
seeing
were
it.
saying that they were saying that 24 years ago at 9/11, and it has been happening. And And so I worry. So there's, as you were, boy, what you were just explaining makes the whole thing even more complicated. I mean, there are all these different aspects to it that unless you were someone who's been studying this for years and years, you wouldn't be able to see how they go together. And I'm just worried that Trump doesn't have somebody like you or like these other experts I was mentioning, advising him because I'm sure he would want to do what was best for Israel. Um, and I don't know that of course, also part of the problem is that he's kind of gotten involved like in Qatar when they have these meetings, like they were having all those meetings about Gaza and all, and Qatar is as you were saying, I mean, it's not really, it has it tries to make friends with everybody, tries to have everybody think that they're their friend. And and so it was very complicated and very sensitive and all that. And and so I just worry that he needs somebody who's been steeped in this for many, many years. So why don't you go to the White House? Have you ever been asked? Have you ever tried?
I haven't, but I think I understand why they're making the mistakes they're making, what the psychological issue is behind it. Maybe we could talk about that after the break.
Sure. Yes, I know we're yeah, oh my goodness, yes. We were supposed to take a break a couple of minutes ago. All right. So, my guest today is Rabbi Pesach Wolicki, and he is an expert, as you can tell, on the Middle East and on Israel and on what is really going on. And we will be right back after this break. And welcome back to Dr. Carol's Couch. I'm your psychiatrist host, Dr. Carole Lieberman. We're having an incredibly interesting conversation today with Rabbi Pesach Wolicki, who is also a columnist for the Jerusalem Post. And he's going to be telling us more about the connections between all of these different countries, uh, Islamist countries, and the White House. But before we do that, I was just asking him off the air, where he came from. And so you said Ohio?
Yeah, I was born in Cleveland, Ohio. I only lived there for the first 2 years of my life. So I don't, it's not like I have any memories of Ohio or have any family connections
Yeah.
there. My parents lived there for a few years, and during that time I was born there. But I've lived in Israel most of my life. For most of my, almost my entire adult life, I've lived in Israel.
Huh. And where in Israel?
So I currently live in Beit Shemesh, which is it's about a half-hour drive outside Jerusalem, most towards Tel Aviv, a little bit to the south. It's right near the Elah Valley where David killed Goliath. If people want to know a biblical
Uh-huh.
location,
Well,
and
also, wasn't
that's where
it?
my wife and I have raised our kids. We've lived there for over 20 years, and before that, I lived in Jerusalem. I lived in a few places in the country.
And that's well, I was just there at the end of October, um, doing helping people with trauma, helping regular Israelis and helping people from the IDF and helping families from of hostages. And it was, an unbelievably wonderful experience. It was a gift to me that I was able to help these people. Um, but when you said Bet Shemesh, I think isn't that one of the kibbutzim that was attacked, or was it near
No,
there?
no, it's not
No,
near there.
but
No,
it's going
that's
towards the south, right?
I mean, it's heading in that direction, but it's nowhere near there. No,
Okay, so you
Beit
weren't you
Shemesh
weren't
was no.
you weren't part of
It's
the
very much in the center of the country, Beit Shemesh. It's like I said, it's not far from Jerusalem.
okay, so you weren't really personally attacked during October 7th.
No, I mean, many of the young men in my neighborhood, my children included, went to war that day, and we even, and a young man who I watched grow up, whose father is one of my best friends, was killed that day, a commando fighting terrorists. So our community, I mean, it's not like not being on the front lines means that you're
Right,
not on the front
right,
lines. The whole country
right.
was on the
The
front
whole
lines.
country is on the front lines,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so your children are still currently in the IDF?
A couple of them, yep. One is a reservist, and I have a son. I have a son who's an officer in a combat unit, and I have a son-in-law who's also a more senior officer in a combat unit. Yeah, who are busy. Yeah.
Yes, that's very, very, very difficult. But the sense in Israel of how, I mean, of course, it's difficult. Nobody wants to die. Nobody wants to know somebody who died. But the sense of being fulfilled to protect the country, to protect Israel, is just overwhelming and is just so beautiful. I wish more people could get to see what that's like. Anyhow, the resilience of Israelis is like no other country. Okay, getting back to other countries, other countries who want to destroy Israel. Um, so let's go to, we were talking about the White House and Turkey and various elements that are trying to get a foothold in the White House. So go ahead and continue with that.
Yeah, so we were talking about what is it like you were saying before the break that you hope that President Trump realizes that Turkey are not good people, they're not good actors. President Trump's always praising Erdogan as he did in the press conference with Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday, and it's very worrisome because, as I said, they seem to be treating the Qataris and the Turks who are actually Muslim Brotherhood, whose ideology is anti-Western and is pro-jihad. They treat them the same as the legitimately moderate Arab states who just want kind of peaceful economic engagement with the West. They're not looking to tear down the West. They don't necessarily want to be Western, but they don't see the West as an adversary. Those are the real moderates: Morocco, Emirates, etc. And that's a big miss. Now, why are they making this mistake? Are they fools? So you were saying before the break that you hope President Trump has some expert who knows what he's talking about. I mean, he has plenty of experts. He has plenty of people who know what they're talking about. But I believe that there's a very fundamental ideological mistake, or we might say psychological mistake, but a kind of axiomatic a way of thinking mistake that goes beyond specific tactics of politics that this administration is making. And it's actually a mistake that most Westerners make about the Middle East. And that is this. And I wrote a column about this in the Jerusalem Post about a month ago, about Trump's what I believe is his major blind spot in the Middle East. And I think that that blind spot is a belief in his bones that ultimately what people care about most is money.
Yes, I think
And that, but I don't mean that cynically. I really believe, but because I think it's not just him. I think it's all Westerners because
right.
we're good people. And what most Westerners honestly believe, down to the marrow of their bones, is that ultimately, what everyone in the world really wants is their own prosperity and the well-being of their family, and
Right.
that's what's really important to people
Right.
at bottom. And therefore, the solutions, as it were, the responses to these difficult situations in the Middle East that come from the West always include some sort of financial or economic incentive. Oh,
Uh-huh.
we're going to rebuild your country and we'll invest and we'll create jobs there, and thinking that that is going to moderate the
Yes.
extremism.
Yes.
And it's a major error. It fails every time. And the reason it fails is that in this part of the world, and especially when you're dealing with Islamists, in this part of the world, it is simply untrue. Let me give you a piece of polling that is very difficult, I would say almost impossible for most Westerners to wrap their head around. There is a polling agency, a very reputable one, out of Ramallah. It's the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research. Okay, so it's affiliated loosely with the Palestinian Authority, but it's a pretty reliable research center, and they do polling of Palestinians. They do polling of the Arabs in this area. And they come out with a new comprehensive poll every couple of months. And one of the questions that they have been consistently asking since October 7th, every few months when they run their polls, and I always read them word for, I read every word of their reports that they come out with. And here's a question that they've asked repeatedly the people of Gaza. Now let's think about that for a second before I even tell you. People of Gaza have been bombed, displaced. You've seen the pictures of the carnage and destruction there, and the claims of genocide and starvation and displacement and all the people and this war zone they're living in, right? Think about everything we know about the people of Gaza. And they polled the people of Gaza and they asked them the following question. Are you in favor of Hamas laying down its weapons if it will mean the end of the war? Very simple question. Should
Yeah.
be, you'd expect that 100% would say yes, right? I mean, think about it. Are you in favor? I'm going to repeat it. Are you in favor of Hamas laying down their weapons to end the war?
Mhm.
Consistently, over 65%, over two-thirds, often it depends on the month when they poll them, but usually it's over 70% of Gazans say no. They don't want the war to end. They want the struggle. They want the armed struggle of Hamas to continue, even though it means the destruction of their own lives, of their own material lives. And this is a misunderstanding. I'll give you another example of the same mistake. When after the 12-day war was over and the Iranian regime had been just decimated, President Trump was asked if he's going to reinstate the sanctions from his first term that prevent the Iranians from selling their oil to the Chinese Communist Party, which almost crippled the regime. And he said no, he's not going to reinstate the sanctions. And the reason he said no, he explained that the Iranians have suffered so much damage in this 12-day war that they need some cash flow in order to rebuild their country. Now, that's a very nice sentiment if they actually would care about rebuilding their country. But what did they do with the money? So the Iranians have continued to sell their oil to the Chinese Communist Party, and they have used that money to rebuild their ballistic missile program,
Right.
to shovel billions of dollars at Hezbollah, not only Hezbollah in Lebanon, but there's also Hezbollah in Venezuela and in Paraguay, and their terrorist drug networks around the world. They've been using it for terrorism and for rebuilding their military assets, and their
Yes.
people are starving and have no
Yes.
money and have
Yes.
no infrastructure. Why? It's not like they don't have revenue. They have revenue. They're just not spending it on the
Yes.
well-being of their
Yes.
country
I know. And
because
it's
Islamists do not care about prosperity. They care
They,
about ideology. And as
that's
long
right.
as President Trump believes that prosperity is what matters most to these people, he will continue to make this
Yeah.
mistake.
Yes, absolutely. Because it's hard for him and it's hard for most Americans to really understand the depth of that dedication to Allah, the willing. I mean, that's when they came into Israel on October 7th with bloodlust in their eyes. It was because, I'm doing this for Allah and I'm going to be rewarded when I get to heaven. And I don't care if I die because then I'll be a martyr. Yes, it's hard for Americans, including Trump, to really get that, how that could be more important than anything else in the world. But
Right.
yes,
Yeah,
it
so they don't
is.
believe it. So they don't believe it. We should all read Robert Spencer. You mentioned Robert Spencer before. He's a dear friend of mine. His books are critical at this
Yes,
time. We
yes,
are we are in a
absolutely.
worldwide war against Islam, and we have to understand who the enemy is. Everyone should be. I'm not even making a plug for my writings. I'm telling you, you
Well,
should all
yes, I
read
was
Robert
gonna,
Spencer.
well, no, I was gonna say, you should have your publicist include your books. I don't, well, just mention them. We're really kind of out of time, but mention a couple of your
All
books.
right. Well, if you go to Israel365.com, go to the store and you'll find a few books I've written there. They're mostly Bible study books, but they have some politics in there as well. You should also go to the Israel 365 YouTube channel where I put out important commentaries about what's going on in Israel and the Middle East 3 times a week. And you should read my columns in the Jerusalem Post and follow me on X at Rabbi PW. And yeah, there's a lot of
Okay,
ways to
good. I'm
follow me,
glad
but you need to seek information about the Middle East. It's not going to come to you organically.
yes, absolutely. Um, yes. And I'll just end with this, that we are in the fight for our lives, that never have radical Islamists in general, never have Islamists been as powerful and on the verge of really taking over the world as they are today.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm glad you mentioned all these things um, because obviously I think people will want more of you. So thank you very much, Rabbi Pesach Wolicki. And thank you all for listening. You've been listening to Dr. Carole's Couch, and I'm your psychiatrist host.